Because the whole problem, I think, in leadership is the lack of self-awareness, the lack of time we spend figuring out who we are at a deeper level with genuineness, understanding our foibles, our imperfections, not rationalizing them away, not saying, yeah, I can do better, or, walking over them, leaning into them and putting your hands in the cesspit. Start by figuring out yourself.
Berman, pretty cool guest this week, Minter Dial. And he was an executive at L'Oreal, Redken, did the corporate gig, but was an entrepreneur before that, an entrepreneur again after, and had just written a book that he's launching, during COVID times called You Lead, and took us through a cool framework. But more than anything, I just think a really interesting guy. And you shared some stories about your days in New York with him as well.
Yeah, this is the guy I kind of want to hang out with off the podcast. He's talking about Grateful Dead and tie-dye shirts. But what I loved about the episode is you're sitting here and you can almost feel his mind race and progress through corporate America and recognize that maybe that's not the best path for him. And, we always talk about what is courage really? If you don't know what you stand for, you never know when to take a stand. And he shares multiple moments where he was prepared for that moment where courage was needed, not just in the boardroom, but in life. And he shared those with us on the episode.
Yeah. And one in particular where he was vulnerable on stage, a pretty moving, powerful story. And, he talks a lot about his framework in check and the authenticity that kind of layers behind that and really drives performance, and that leaders need to realize who you are before you can lead.
I think we're learning that multiple people come on the show and they have a framework and it works for them. And if it sticks for you, then run with it. And here's another example of that. And it was nice that courage made his list of, it's part of check, which is cool. But he's just an overall great guy. He's done a lot of things. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's been a leader. He's not afraid to be vulnerable. He's going to tell you what he thinks, but he's going to do it in a way that's really not going to belittle anybody. Very thoughtful guy. I think you're going to like the show. Minter Dial, how are you, my friend?
I am well, Ryan. Ryan 1, Ryan 2, Ryan Berman. How are you?
I'm good. So how's your run today? And by the way, what time is it there?
So it is 6:05. It's 5 minutes past Scotch time, PM.
Do you have a Scotch with you? Are you prepared fully for this?
No, I thought I'd go water first. I was trying to be sensible. I have a drinks set up at 7:00, 2 Zoom drinks. So if I want to finish and still sound coherent, I thought I'd go easy.
So Minter, when I see the things that I'm most passionate about, and I see what I'd like to do with my future, you're kind of already living it. And it's been a joy to sort of see your background. And you've been an author, you've been a speaker, you are a speaker, you're doing consulting work in the leadership space. But you like me, you came out of branding and there's digital strategy. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I've done so many wacky random things in my life. I started a travel agency for musicians. And for 2 years, I was hanging out with, generally the manager of Madonna and Sting and people like that, and Hunter S. Thompson. So that kind of sounds...
Who are these people? Whether Madonna?
They're silly little... Well, there used to be a time, back in the days, we had tours and concerts and travel. Well, so that would be sort of the one that's the most, just fascinating for me. Otherwise, I worked in a zoo and an aquarium as well, and took care of the customers, the animals.
Well, I mean, you've been an entrepreneur for well over a decade now, but you were in the corporate world for quite a while, running L'Oreal. And what made you want to make a change from the corporate space to going back to really a daily hustle?
Well, so at some level, there's a little story in my head, but I probably not fully honest with myself, but I was going back to being an entrepreneur because my first job, I was actually a banker. And while I was banking, I started up a luxury leather goods company on the side. So like a side hustle. And when I was at L'Oreal, I was on the executive committee of the professional division worldwide. And I got to see up close what it all meant and where it was all going and the people I would be hanging out with. And I just said, I'd rather be doing something else bigger for me, spreading, let's say, a more missionary type of purpose for companies than banging in my head on selling shampoos and hair colorants and so on that L'Oreal was doing at the time. So I went off and it was a lifestyle choice as well with my wife. We wanted to do a little bit differently things. And I had another project, which was to do a film. So lots of other things needed to happen and started off my journey.
Yeah. So other things were tugging at you. I know that experience well too. Just, you talk about authenticity in this new book, which we'll get into, but were you yourself not feeling like you were your authentic self when you were in the corporate world? And was that pulling at you as well? Because I know what that grind's like, and I can imagine, being an entrepreneur before, going in and spending, a long time in a fruitful career in that space. Something didn't feel right. And I'm assuming that's what's coming out in this book.
Yeah, totally. Well, at some level, I certainly wasn't perfect in my journey, and I didn't switch it overnight. There was definitely a stimulus that got me thinking bigger about what I was doing. And there's a time when I was working in Manhattan. So my second stint of working in Manhattan, I come now as an expat out of L'Oreal, France, working in L'Oreal USA. And I'm back in the US where I went to university, and I also worked in the investment bank. And so at the time I was still wearing ties, and the United States system, or the New York rhythm, was, you go into work early and then you go home reasonably early so you could have dinner with the family. And for me, oftentimes I'd rush home, rip off my tie, slip on some sort of tie-dye, and then after dinner, hang out and wig out to listening to the Grateful Dead. And so I was like, I got this tie to tie-dye thing going on. And I know when I have to go back to work, get up at 5, shower, shave, look the part, play the part. And it didn't feel right. And so at some level, I knew that I had to have those two things going. And my experience, to be exact, really wasn't so discordant when I was at Redken. There was a sense of community, building up a loyalty base. And then when I was back in the L'Oreal world, I was like, oh, there I'm different. I'm feeling not connected myself. And I knew I had to part ways. Plus, I also didn't really believe in the way that they were doing branding and marketing. So philosophically, I had some differences. I knew I wasn't being myself fully. How can I lean more into my tie-dye thing and wear a tie-dye to work?
Yeah, I want to be really careful for the listeners, because I think we have a tendency to vilify corporate, and there's a lot of good that can come from corporate America. There's stability, there's structure, there's resources. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how this next generation take over in corporate, because you're going to see more purpose. I don't know if you saw Lawrence Fink's new letter to all of his CEOs, and this is a BlackRock CEO,
sure.
$6 trillion in assets. And he has been warning for the last 2 years that, hey, CEOs, if there's not purpose in your companies, like, we're not interested in having you as part of our portfolio. And when you're Lawrence Fink and you have $6 trillion in assets, you're not doing this for press. You're doing this because you see the future and you know what's coming. So I think, like, the tie-dye days are coming. This sort of, you could still be intense with how you go about your work, but you don't have to dress like the tie guy. You don't have to be the tie guy anymore. So I'm fascinated to see what comes of it. But I also, admire, I think all three of us have been on our own journey. Same thing. Started in New York City. Now, I wasn't as dangerous as you, because I think people who know money, that's where that's like the wow factor. The fact that you know money and then you can like bring that into business is off the charts. For me, I've always been like learning from the Mad Men people. Well, you learn what to do by watching what not to do too. So is there one lesson like where you're like, oh, like already you could feel how L'Oreal was doing marketing wasn't flying for you? Was that your sort of moment where you're like, oh, okay, storing this acorn away, I'm not going to do it like this? And like, what did you like? Where was that one moment for you that you're like, no, I think this is wrong, and I believe in my conviction?
All right. Well, so there were several instances. The big one was sort of kind of big for everybody, but it happened for me as I was in my office in Manhattan. This is 2001, so it's well before I've even left. And the brand I'm running is Redken, which is this hair care company. So Ryan Berman, you're not going to know so much about them. But
in 2001, I did. In 2001, I knew him.
There you go. And I was running this. So Redken's signature is Fifth Avenue, New York City. And if you've ever opened up a glossy magazine, you might see a Redken advertisement and you'll see some portion of New York always within the background, whether it's a yellow cab or an iconic landmark. Two of my campaigns for 2002 had the Twin Towers in the background. And my office overlooked the Twin Towers. And the experience I had was existential because at the one hand, there's a practical level. Oh my God, how am I going to run the business? What I got to do to get things going? This is going to be complicated. How am I going to replace my advertisements, which are going to be due in January and March 2002? 4 friends who were killed. And I am thinking as I watched this happen in front of me in my window, I had a perfect view. I took photographs and everything. Was I could only conjure up the image of my grandfather, who was the captain of a ship in the United States Navy in Manila Bay on December 8, 1941, which is the date line crosses over. And he gets woken up by his cook, Alexa, who was a Polish American, and Captain, we've been attacked. And then he wrote in the logbook at 0340 hours, we've been attacked, we are at war. And so I was dialing into that experience and thinking, how important is it to sell shampoos when this is what's going on? So that was my like step change moment.
So what's crazy is I'm a half mile away from you at this time. I'm living on First and First, and the advertising world, you start later, but you go later. So I was still at home, and my roommate had like bursted into my room. He's like, look out your window, and there's a hole in one of the towers. And we basically race up to our roofs, and by the time we got there, the second hole was in. And nobody's phone worked on that day. It took forever to get in touch with anybody. And when we finally got in touch with people, we were close enough to the towers that our friends could walk to us, but far enough away that you felt safe. And so we were just trying to get like anybody, like come to us, our place will be a haven. We went and got, we got like beers, but we also got like everything you needed to like hang out for a while. And that night, I remember writing a note to myself, like, what am I doing? And I had almost been like a zombie, walking around, doing the same thing, going to work. I was like part of the team that was running the Subway business at the time. And I remember the client being like, no, we need to have a message on the air. As I'm watching tanks, because I was living under 14th Street, as I'm watching tanks go down Houston Street in New York City, it was a insane moment and time. So I empathize with that sort of traumatic glitch in life for me as well. And I think that was a big reason why I ended up moving west. It's like this is like a therapy session for all of us right now. The irony, Minter, is you do talk about this story on your side in the book, and you do talk about it. I'm smiling because you talk about it when you talk about courage. And I love that one of the lines that you have in that section is, do you know what you stand for, and do you have the courage to stand out for it as a leader in your organization? And, I am so like, we say it all the time. Like, if you don't know what you stand for, you never know when to take a stand.
And there's different forms of courage. And an interesting one happened for me that morning. So we had the executive committee meeting that morning. And we're all like calling each other, what are we going to do? Well, the boss said, we're going to maintain it. We got to show that the ship goes on, the show goes on, stiff upper lip. And you could say that's a form of courage within that. But standing up to him and saying, there's other shit going on. We need to take care of our people. That also took courage, because I can tell you look like a little whiz bag. Come on, you can stand up, man up. Interesting. So I played rugby for 18 years, and the story for me that really got me into this notion of standing up for what you believe is in the rugby locker room, and there's hardly a more masculine environment after a game. You're showering, you're all muddy and beaten up. And a couple of guys started talking trash about some girls. And I said, well, you don't need to say that. I know them. They're you don't need to speak like that. You don't need to use those words. What's your problem, Dial? There was no need for me to do it, behind closed walls. In that environment, we're all running around naked. I mean, it's still steamy hot, and that's the environment. And I just felt like I needed to talk about it. And one of the people in the group came to me, and many months later, and said, you know what? I'll never forget what you did. And it turned out he was gay. And he felt that he could never have that courage to go up and step up and talk about those kinds of things, because God knows what would fall on him.
I actually played rugby too, Minter.
Hey,
yeah,
nice.
In university. Great sport. Definitely banged my body up.
Yeah, what position were you?
Fly half. What about you?
Nice. Good hands, good foot.
Yep, right. And you?
Most of the time, I'm a small guy, so I was on the wing or fullback.
Gotcha.
I like to drop people, but I had good foot too.
Yeah, fun sport. And yeah, I mean, those environments where you're in kind of predicaments and there's so much that goes unsaid, going back to the corporate world kind of reminds me of the boardroom, right? There's a lot that's unsaid in those rooms. And it does take a lot of courage to face fears and even leave the corporate environment and go back out on your own. And, thinking about 2001, we're in a situation again with the pandemic where everybody is questioning what they're doing and more so why they're doing it. And I want to get to the book that you just launched and, the premise for it. And I think, it's very similar to Courageous and Return on Courage and really facing your fears and being authentic to who you are as a person. And I think, in the corporate world, I'm curious just in when you wrote the book, why do you think people are having a hard time being their authentic self in corporate brands? And even speaking from yourself, like why the facade? And is it societal pressure? Is it fear of not being able to move up, judgment, shame that sits in the boardroom? Just curious on what are some of the challenges that individuals face, and what do you talk about in terms of ways that you can get past those in the book?
All right, so there are two big pieces to this. And the first is actually the challenge or the time needed to get to know who you are actually. Because being your authentic self is a lovely term, but kind of bullshit. Because if you haven't done the work on who you are, then you're being authentic about what? And the second is, it doesn't look like it pays, because the models that are above us haven't, they don't. And so in order to break through, why ruffle feathers? All I have to do is shut my mouth and I'll be promoted. The shit rises to the top. And so on balance, the system is predictably like this. And the idea, we're risk averse. We're in a career path. We're in a family. Because the idea, actually, it's similar to a family, because at the end of the day, we're going to be hanging out with these people for a long time. So am I prepared to say, hey, Ryan Thompson, you suck, right? because I'm going to pay the price of that. If you're a colleague, they're going to badmouth me. It's going to go, and that'll stick with me for the rest of my career in that company. So tough love in a work environment looks difficult to do. Standing up and standing out feels bad because you're not part of the tribe. Then you're standing out like a zit. And people just want to excoriate the zit and just move it out because they're not part of us. Depending on the culture, how much we're talking about. Of course, there are cultures that are wildly violent and only tough, no love. But in general, if that's not a good path either.
You came up with a framework in the book called Check, correct?
Yes.
Can you take us through that?
All right. So the thing about check is, and it's so often the case, there's so many words. You can put words on any door in an annual report, but just, I'm a literary guy, so it's a bunch of bullshit a lot of the time. But what I tried to do was to look at the combination and make a selection of words that really were important to me. And obviously I meant not other words. You have to be strategic even in the words you choose to get to this acronym, which is CHECK. And I also wanted to not just say what you always say, the obvious side, move, as Rohit Bhagarva likes to say, the non-obvious elements of each. So just to take the first one, which is curiosity. The second one is the courage one, which is why we're here together. But the first one is curiosity. And I systematically on my podcast have people on, how do you describe yourself? Well, I'm curious. And I think anyone who's anybody at some level has to be curious. I mean, because we're in changing mode. It's all going everywhere. So you got to stay up with the Joneses. You got to open. But the challenge is actually limiting your curiosity at some level, because it can be easy just to go down rabbit holes. Oh, I'm having fun. You're learning stuff, but are you doing stuff too? So the curiosity has to be not just intellectual, but sort of hand labor. Go do the shit. If you're an iPhone and an Apple boy, go buy an Android and use it for a week. If you're used to something, see how you can break down that mold. And that sort of curiosity is a harder thing to have. And to do it in a disciplined manner, figure out what you not what you want to learn, but what you need to learn.
Minter, you're taking words out of my mouth here. I'm
hey.
Like, no, I love it because I agree with you. Like curiosity keeps coming up, Ryan, right? Like, when rest in peace, Tony Hsieh, when we went and saw Tony at Zappos, he actually sort of challenged back, is your book called Return on Courage or Return on Curiosity? Mm-hmm. Jack Williams from Royal Caribbean, when he was running that company, the big bets he made was off of curiosity. But I love how you brought it back to discipline, because without it, you're on an acid trip and you're slipping down deeper and deeper in your tie-dye, and it never ends. And so, like,
God knows I know where that goes.
I figured this was a safe place to say something like that. So
we're just between us, right?
Yeah. This is, no one else is listening. I'm just here. I was interested. Does discipline play in other of the steps as well? Generally not in the check necessarily, but I talk about being fair and firm. So you have to have the discipline to check in with yourself. When are you being fair and firm with everybody, or do you have little privileges and preferences? The notion of discipline comes in quite a lot with regard to empathy. Because I tend to make the link between empathy and time. The issue is that we're sort of all running around gormless, headless chickens. And, we see somebody, how you doing? I'm fine. Or how you doing? I'm not so fine, but I don't have time for that. And so the discipline needs to not only look at somebody and be present with them, but also know that this stuff comes around. So always prepare for padded time to allow for those conversations to happen when they need to happen. There's nothing, I get called out for it at home. So, not perfect. But for example, my children, when they were younger, would come to me, hey, Pa, I need to tell you something. Not now, kid, I got to do something. Well, actually, that's when I needed to be present. So in order for that to happen, I needed to plan ahead
and give myself cushions so I could just do that little 10-minute session with him or her and then go back to my work. But I planned in that extra time. I wasn't like cutting it so short that everything is back to back all the time.
That's I want to get back to the rest of the framework because we kind of took a
Rabbit
path
hole.
off. But yeah, I think this is really important because, we've talked to other guests and this idea of this cult of productivity has come up. And I think technology has obviously influenced the speed at which we're moving. And it's sad. It's, the example of your kids who just want attention, right? That's what they need. They need your focused attention and not a screen in front of your face. But employees need that too, right? And I know in my corporate career, one of the things that we rated low on and that we heard from the consultancy that we hired that many brands rate low on is coaching and feedback. And that takes time, right? And if you're in back-to-back meetings all day, stuck in traffic, rushing in and out of everything, you're not creating that space. So I really like that concept of creating that time to be able to have that connection. And what do you think is, in your opinion, is the driving force behind the reason we don't have time? Is it just priorities, or is it something else?
This cult of productivity, the competition and all that that's there. I tend to get I think it's actually dangerous, this cult of productivity. The fact is that we end up pulling on our resources, whether it's our human abilities or our sleep or taking away time from family or other things that resource us, that give us energy. And we just rush after these numbers and therefore we're not present with ourselves. We end up, as you were saying, back-to-back meetings stressed out. And stress is, along with lack of time, the second biggest reason for not being able to listen to people. So I feel that the notion of performance is also almost linked, and I say almost because not entirely, but linked to the fact that we don't know who we are and what we want to be. We replace being with doing more stuff. If we could sit back and think a little bit more strategically about who we want it to be, what we want it to be known for, have that courage, then you stop doing some of the things you're doing that are nice to have, justifiable. Yeah, I'd love to do it, but it's not what I need to do. And then not only will you be more, I think, fruitful in the activities you do, you'll end up with enough extra time to deal with like listening, whether it's your employee, your kid, distributor, or whomever. There's so many opportunities to listen. And I'll tell you a little story. When I was in Canada, I mean, I did the same thing in New York with Marianne, but Sandy was my assistant in Montreal, and she fiercely defended my time. Here's why. I wanted to have 50% of every day without meetings. So that was the theory, because at times the boss said, you need to come in a meeting. Yes, sir. All right, well, that happened. But on balance, for the rest of the time, she blocked out my time, which allowed me then to have an open door so that whoever wanted to walk in knew that they could come in. I generated a modus operandi where they realized that they were taking my time, so they didn't sort of come in and just sort of waltz in. Hey, so what's up, Doc? It wasn't like that kind of a situation. But by having that openness, and then I was also on the road visiting customers, checking out what was happening up and down the hierarchy, and that just gave me a full version of what was going on. So planning out that time ahead of time allowed me to focus on what was necessary. And by the way, when I was writing my strategic notes, I closed the door. And then I made sure that I was focused. Because by the way, I'm dealing with French and the politics and the internal, so it's not always fun, but you gotta,
So our curiosity has rabbit holed us off of check. And I want to get back to this concept of leadership, because I think this is where the leader comes in. The leader can decide how you spend your time, where you spend your time. We don't have to be zombies, basically, and just sort of reacting. But can we go back to check? So take us to the top again. So the C is curiosity.
And H is humility. And the beauty of humility is that, again, the issue is, are you aware of who you are? your self-awareness. And humility is also about being able to ask for help. It's remarkable how much we get sort of with the ego head. Oh, well, we've got to know it all. It's got to come from us. If I say, hey, listen, Ryan, I really don't know what I'm doing here. Can you give me a hand? Which tantamount to, in Brene Brown language, being vulnerable, showing that I'm not capable, showing I'm not the full man I think I am. That is also humility, and putting other people on a pedestal, bringing them up, requires humility. Get off your ego trip. Remember that actually, at the end of the day, you die, and we need to be small. That's what the humility story is.
Yeah, we're going to introduce you to a woman named Lisa Stromberg, who's been on the show, because it's funny. We have our framework and price. You've got check. They have something called Hardy. Hey, whatever works for you, right? Like,
right.
The H in Hardy is humility. It's
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think if you're a curious person and you're open to like knowing that you don't know everything, then I think humility seems to come with it. But but perhaps not. And like, so then the E is
empathy.
Okay.
And empathy, I've written a book on empathy, so we could talk a lot about that. But let me just say the one thing which is less obvious about empathy, which is to have empathy with yourself. And the thing about empathy is that it's not the action. People get very mistaken. Empathy is an ability to understand your thoughts, feelings, and experiences. And at another level, depending on the type of definition you have of empathy, of feeling your feelings. But it's not anything I do afterwards yet. That's what follows. So the challenge is and why the whole check is all about checking in with yourself. Because the whole problem, I think, in leadership is the lack of self-awareness, the lack of time we spend figuring out who we are at a deeper level with genuineness, understanding our foibles, our imperfections, not rationalizing them away, not saying, yeah, I can do better, or, walking over them, leaning into them and putting your hands in the cesspit. So that's why I check in overall. But E for empathy, self-empathy. Start by figuring out yourself. Feel your feelings. And I think it's so important in today's world where, generally speaking, leaders think of themselves as like the energizer button, the chief energizer, the one who's got to bring it all. Hey, Rod, let's do it. Let's do it now. But fact is that where you're pulling on yourself, you're drawing on yourself and your energy. So you need to be aware of your own energies and your own emotions. And if you're not feeling well, recognize it, feel you're not feeling well, and tell people, hey, today I'm not feeling well. I'm sorry about that. I just had a bad thing happen to me. And explain that to other people. So then when you go, you act like an asshole, it's be understandable because you explained that you had something bad happen to you. You didn't feel well. You didn't sleep well or something else. Your energies weren't where they're supposed to be.
And then the C, I am assuming, is
courage. Yep. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, except to say, it's not easy to be courageous. It's really about in full knowledge of your fears and doing things. And then the last one is the K. And the K is definitely not the most common one. And it's also fairly misunderstood as well. And that's for karma. So K for karma, what does it mean? Well, it means what are your intentions and what are your actions? So the intentions, again, you have to have honesty with regard to what you're trying to achieve, because you can screw it up in your actions. Just like with empathy, you can screw it up in your actions. But you need to do these actions. And then the key is you're not thinking about these actions just for the payback. And that's what karma is.
So it's almost like self-fulfilling karma.
It's nope. It's really a belief that I want to do good.
Okay.
I do. I believe I want to do good. That's where it's coming from. And I'm honest about that intention. And I'm giving out stuff, but I'm not immediately imagining anything coming back. It's just, that's how it goes. And by the way, just like any of these things, it's not about the tyranny of karma or the tyranny of empathy. It's about having more karma and having more empathy.
What I really like about the framework the most is we're kind of back full circle to where we started. Like Thompson, at the top of the hour, you talked about how there's so much unsaid in the boardroom. And maybe you can like simply sum that up as because you're not prepared for when the moment arrives to have something to say. And so in the moment, have something to say, be prepared to have something to say. And what I really like about check is if you use your time wisely, you go a little slower to go faster later, then you're ready when that moment comes up for you, whether it was a locker room, a boardroom, whatever room you were in, you were prepared to say what needed to be said. And those are moments that are rooted in knowledge. And I think that is courageous. And again, I think that's that intentionality piece that you're talking about. So we're kind of full circle. We probably should have started with this really, but like, if you like, just because we've been talking about the book, I'm air quoting if you're listening. So talk, like if you were going to give us the log line on the book, on the title, why you chose the title, just give it to us if you don't mind.
Right. So the sort of unwritten title is You Lead You. And that really, and it's not just you lead you at work, you lead you at the dinner table with the family, you lead you with your friends having beers, you lead you in the locker room. This is what I mean by you lead you. And you need to bring that full sense of you to work. It's just, it's remarkable how much of that facade that happens. And not only do I feel that it makes you a better leader, it actually makes you a healthier person. And right now, the issue that we have today with our pandemic story, it makes it so obvious. But even before and certainly after, the level of burnout, rushing around, doing, performing and thinking about things that don't really resonate with me is cause for burnout. And I'm 56. I have seen so many people of my ilk really go off the deep end. Divorce. I'm typically thinking of guys who didn't, they got the big swank car, big title. They thought they were doing great things, but then all of a sudden they're bored of their lives. And plus, they don't actually have good friends. They have friends who are attracted to them because of their Mercedes Benz, as Janis Joplin might like to say.
Well, I like that. I mean, there's definitely an issue in male culture, and just, you talked about the locker room, we've talked about the boardroom. I mean,
unfortunately, very male.
Yeah. And you you brought up Brene Brown, and her work on vulnerability is fantastic. I mean, but it's hard in this society for males to be vulnerable. It's a sign of weakness. But if you are confident in who you are and you've done the work to understand that, there's no issue.
Well, I'm going to push back, Thompson, and say there is still an issue. And it came from me in my case. I'm going to tell you a story because it really was remarkable for me, which was when I was doing a press conference, about 60 or 80 people in the room, all big deal editors, famous people. And so very swank environment. And there I got up and spoke, and I was pretty nervous because of the caliber of people in the room. And I went into it, and all of a sudden I skipped a beat, and I felt the need to cry. Something happened, triggered. All of a sudden I'm crying in front of everybody. This just doesn't happen. This isn't happening. I was so mortified. Wanted to shrivel up, die, leave, go, walk out. So what happened was that someone in the audience, presumably a friend or a friendly face, decided to clap and bring me back. So that gave me some time to breathe. I come back, I finish the thing. Obviously, I'm excusing myself every other second, or excusing myself to the room, saying, "I'm so sorry, I can't believe I did that." And then at the end, I was sort of, oh God, this is awkward. And what was remarkable was that a bunch of people, I mean, really a large number of people, including the most famous person in the room and some of the other people, came up to me, shook my hands, or hugged me, or looked at me with great intensity in the eye. And what was obvious for me was they didn't feel less of me. And surely some people snuck out the back because maybe their time was up, or they're like, fucking, he was a loser. Sure. But for the rest, what was interesting was that connection. And whereas I was thinking I was a loser, weak, actually somehow not only they didn't think less of me, they connected more with me. And that was a huge lesson. Not that I need to cry all the time, and there's like moderation in all these things, right? But it's just doing more of it, like more karma, more empathy, not all the time, not crying all the time, but understanding that it can be a really powerful thing to recognize that you're feeling weak.
You can make a case that the people who left the room weren't ready for you for whatever reason. It's, like whatever stains were on their brain from the boss who said, right, the New York City boss who's like, no, we need the upper lip. We got to keep pushing forward. And
or maybe they had something to do and they had to rush off, and just don't take too much out of that. And anyway, the confidence point, Ryan Thompson, just was, it wasn't easy for me. And I don't think I'm going to easily roll into it again, but I do know that it felt good at the end. And so I'm not going to just get on the tear jerker kind of road. That's not what I want to do, but just to be able to know that is okay to be like that. And that's where I can certainly improve more. I think I still don't do it enough.
Yeah, I think that's where I was headed in my comment, that when you have these types of experiences, they are confidence builders. Like it's getting through whatever that scary moment is, right? That moment of vulnerability, and like listening to Brene Brown on her TED Talk and how vulnerable she was. I mean, it's those moments where they're uncomfortable, which is the same thing as fear. Fear is uncomfortable. How do you move through it? How do you have courage to move through it? And on the other side of that, it's not as bad as you probably think it is.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, it's in the end of the day, just like you're saying before, it's all about the fears that we're having and building up and just embracing them. I mean, for me, and it's not in the book really, because the Kogan didn't really want me to get into it, but I think what we could all do more of and would bulk up our courage would be to be able to discuss a little bit more openly, more frequently about death. I feel whether it's the 2001 or the current pandemic, the existential inability for us to accept and embrace our death, which is why I love the Grateful Dead, of course, is part of why we're not courageous. We're hunkering down, go the safe route, and we're not able to stand out because it's too risky. Risk averse is just a proxy for our fear of death. That's my line. I don't know. It's certainly philosophical, but I think that this is where we're at in society today.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And Western society isn't taught to grieve. And you go through a lot of different phases of grief in many scenarios in life, and death being, experiencing death with somebody close is one of the biggest ones. And yeah, there's a tremendous amount of fear tied to that. That's interesting. I mean, we could spend a whole podcast talking about that. I'm curious, this is a podcast about courage. You've done a lot of things. You've produced a documentary. You've, written 4 books. You've worked in corporate environments on big brands. You've consulted CEOs. What do you believe is the most courageous thing that you've done, either personally or professionally, in your life?
Well, so the image that I have in my mind, because I feel like I've done a few, but the one that comes up right now, as you ask me, is standing up in front of 550 people on the 18th of September in Paris. And I had been flown in by the CEO, whereas usually my whole team did the 2-hour, 15-minute speech. I ended up being allocated this role. So I had to learn. And when we do at L'Oreal, the speeches, they are rehearsed, and every word, every image, every film, it's just second by second. And so there I was, I had a situation in New York with 4 friends who were missing, my wife who's in the hospital. It was complicated on many levels, right? And I'm running this brand, and I'm about to go on, and I decide to go off script. You just don't do that. So for the first really 5-10 minutes, I just spoke about what I felt. I was the only American in the room. I was certainly the only individual who had seen the whole thing happen. And I'm running a company that's tagline is Fifth Avenue, New York City. So it's every level I felt attacked. I mean, it was really quite an experience. And to be able to say that, and I'm just funny enough, since I mentioned this in the book, I've had, in the last maybe week, I've had 5 or 6 people who have written to me, said they read the book. They remember that moment as one of the standout moments in their careers as well, somehow participating in that morning. And how the meaningfulness of it, when you can insert meaningfulness in what you're doing, instead of just flogging shampoos, what are you doing? And our mission was earn a better living, live a better life. And so I, really embraced that whole concept. And I said, this is what we need to be doing. In a L'Oreal world, this was not the way we did things. Because I'm worth it.
I could feel your, like, it's you can feel the story, like the storytelling happening, and feel that it's genuine, which obviously that's the whole point of the book. It's like, is to find yourself and be yourself, and maybe somewhere in between you got to face yourself, before you can actually go be the person that you want to go be. And I do think it's fascinating that we've talked a lot about time today, because it's like when these podcasts are good, you run out of time very fast, and so it's actually. I think we're actually at Scotch time for you, or whatever your drink du jour is going to be tonight. I'm a huge fan of Czech. It's been really nice getting to know you, Minter. I know this is not the end of it for sure. It just seems like there's too many synergies between what you're passionate about doing. I think we feel the same way. We're driven by our purpose too. It's something that's more than just like talking about courage. If you can teach people to spot fear and understand fear, then they can actually face those fears. And like, that's kind of why we get up every day and do what we do. And so thank you for Czech. I feel like I can use that immediately, and let's keep the conversation going, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Berman Thompson, thank you so much. That was a great pleasure. Fun talking about important topics.
Back to the records and tie-dye. We're coming to you next time. Let's go to lunch. Can we come visit you? Okay, for those of you who can't see what he's doing, this is why you have to watch the video. Thanks for coming on, Minter.
If you enjoyed the episode, please give us 5 stars, subscribe, and leave us a comment.
If you like what you just heard, sign up for your weekly dose of courage at returnoncourage.com.